who worship the Lord, worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. Those who worship the Lord, worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. If we say that we know him, but we don't keep his word, then we walk in the darkness, and the truth's not in us. If we walk in the light, we will have fellowship sweet, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from sin. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light.
Well, you were expecting me to say good morning to you, aren't you? Well, and I am. Here I am in my little part of the world, and there you are in your little part of the world. And we're going to be looking at some more verses in Mark chapter 6 today, where we'll be hanging out this morning. And I am busy with just trying to catch up in my office here a little bit this morning, and thinking about, I got several things to check off the list, but some of my mail's just kind of stacked up a little bit the last few days, and looking around at my desk. But hey, you have that too, don't you? We all have the mundane stuff, do we not? The mundane stuff of mail, the mundane stuff of political advertisements ad nauseum. And you have those in your box, I'm sure. And, it is the season, and hope that you will vote next week. I hope that you will give consideration to your candidates. I hope that you'll give consideration to thinking about people who will legislate along the lines of the faith as much as you can find. I mean, many will not be believers themselves, but perhaps some of their values would align. And so I'd encourage you to research that. Today I'll be going out to Augusta and picking up voter guides for us here locally, trying to remember what vote your faith. I gave you the website before. Faith Votes. No, that wasn't it. I'll have to go back and look up what that website was that you can go to, at least on some of the more broadly. But then I will have something here for you. You can always go to the Christian Civic League of Maine. Google them and get to them and maybe get some guidance there on how you would vote. To me, it just seems like, how have we gotten so bizarre in our country? We've gotten so very, very, very bizarre. How are the people who are in leadership in many of these places, how are they even there? I mean, it's like they don't even make sense. And I'm not talking about parties. I'm just talking about people in leadership in some of the offices. It just doesn't make sense. And some of the decisions that get made, they just make no sense. So we need to pray. Part of it is God establishing the playing field as He wants it to be, as He moves us toward the time of tribulation that will come at some point in time. We don't know when it will come. It will come at some point in time, and God is moving us toward that. So some of the things that happen that we just look at, about the interest rates going up again yesterday. Now they've been going almost a 1 percentage point per clip every time they're making a decision right now. It's not quite, it's 0.75. And how does that affect lots of things? So anyway, we're all living in this world. We're living thinking about how do we pay utilities. We're thinking about all these things. We're thinking about people in need, and it is a time perhaps to recalibrate, a time perhaps to trust in God. Even as I talk about these things, I mean, the passage we'll be looking at this morning is a fortifier of faith, to remember in whom we have our confidence. My Faith Votes, is Don found it for us there, myfaithvotes.org, a website that can help you in thinking about how you will vote. Thanks, Don. Appreciate that. And I think that's probably national in scope. So I just encourage you to take a look at that. But thinking about the needs that we may see in our world, thinking about our own needs, an opportunity for us to have an upward gaze, to have our eyes fixed on Jesus, to be trusting in Him for our needs. Now, we began in Mark chapter 6 yesterday, not at the beginning of the chapter, but we began in Mark 6, verse 30, and we'd said the apostles gathered around Jesus, reported to Him all they had done and taught, and that was 2 days ago that we looked at all that they had done and taught, and the falling of Satan, and that they were to rejoice that their names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And then yesterday we spent the morning looking at verses 31 and 32, and then 1 Kings chapter 19. Because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. They were by themselves. The intent of getting away, and I talked about the importance of our souls and sleep and rest, and not soul sleep, no, but our souls needing, our bodies needing to get rest for the good of our souls. There's a difference there. But our bodies needing that rest. And so we talked about that yesterday, and the intent of getting away, taking a nap, things of that nature, taking a vacay, if you're able to write a vacay into your life, to take a vacation, to get away from things, and to get a break. Talked about that yesterday. We talked about sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. But today we pick up and we see that verse 33, we see it being said, But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. I mean, even before they could get where they were going, others recognized who they were, ran on ahead of them, and when they got to where they were going, there was already a crowd there. Verse 34, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Now, again, notice the response of Jesus. The response of Jesus is a response of compassion. I can tell you that may not be my response all the time. It might be like, come on, I need a break. Can I just have some space for a little bit? That might be my response, but that's not Jesus' response. Jesus' response is one of compassion on them, and says they were like sheep without a shepherd. We've read that verse before as a parallel verse over in Matthew chapter 9. I believe it's down around verse 35. But it says he just right out of the gate began teaching them many things. It says, by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and get some burgers. Wait, paraphrase. Get something to eat. That's what it says. He says, but he gave them this answer. You give them something to eat. And they said to him, that would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish, and the number of men who had eaten was 5,000. 5,000. Now, there are places that will say it, and this is maybe a truth. I don't know. Either way you go, let me just unpack this for you. Some say, well, they only counted the men in those days, so there were more likely, 15,000 people because there were women and children that didn't get counted in the count. That may or may not be true. But even feeding 5,000, and the reason I say this, and I ask a question of this, and also note the significance, whether it's 15,000 or 5,000. I mean, the only difference it makes is it's even more astounding if Jesus actually fed 15,000 people as opposed to feeding 5,000 people. But how are they going to count that many people? Now, there is a little hint into this in verse 40. It says, so they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. So they could go around and count how many groups. So there's this many groups of 50s. There's this many groups of hundreds. That may be an indicator here in Mark as to how they knew the approximate number of people. And I mean, when it says 5,000, it perhaps is not giving an exacting number. But still, to have a little bit of food and feed that many people is an absolute amazing thing. If you will go along with what has been taught along the way by lots of different Bible teachers, and we've generally accepted that he was feeding up to 15,000 people. If you will accept that, this is absolutely astounding. All I'm saying is, if in the count of chapter 6, verse 40, where it says they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, if they were counting the women and the children and the men, if they're counting everybody, to me, it doesn't matter. To me, it's a fact that they had so little and they fed so many and they had so much left over. Well, there's a question being asked. That's why I paused. Someone said, I can't remember what chapter verse it was, but I read they only picked up 7. Yeah, Jesus did this a couple times. This is not the only time that this happened. There are at least 2 occasions where Jesus did this type of miraculous feeding of people, and this is one of them. The other we'll read in Mark chapter 8. I think that is where we would go, if I remember correctly. Let me just look real fast and see. Yes, Mark chapter 8 is the second feeding of the 4,000, and that's where they will gather up fewer baskets. So that was asked in the comment section there. And so that is the answer. Just 2 chapters away, we will see him do this all over again. And even in that, here's a very interesting question. If Jesus is doing this twice, I mean, is there a lesson? I mean, could a lesson be that, I mean, Jesus will continue to work on our behalf? I mean, is that part of the lesson that why should we be surprised that he would do this twice? I mean, why are we surprised when God works on our behalf again and again and again? I mean, just to trust him. Now, I don't think we should be testing God and saying, well, God, you are doing this, you did it once, but you won't do it again, and put him to the test. But I do think that we should learn to trust him in what he will do. So, Dr. Kemper, my dear friend from Grace Christian University, saying math with the Almighty, 5 plus 2 equals 5,000 with a remainder of 12. Yeah, that's a different kind of math, isn't it? And certainly is. Yeah, it doesn't always stack up. It doesn't always add up. And, Ken, you probably would have all kinds of stories that you could tell of how you've seen God work on your behalf, both when you were on the mission field, but then also as president of Grace Christian University. And you would probably have stories of how you've seen God work again and again and again. It's great having you along and great seeing you in the comments there, dear brother. Ken and I were roomies a few times together in our PhD studies, and dear brother there, a big fan of Dr. Ken and all he does. So yeah, thanks for pointing out the math. 5 plus 2 equals 5,000. That's a great one. Remainder of 12. You look at all that he did in this passage, and what they brought to him, and Jesus saying, I mean, he had a plan in mind here, a total plan. He's saying, hey, you guys go on out, send them out, let them get some food. Actually, he's not saying this. The disciples are saying this to him. Wrote place, it's already late. Send the people away to go to the surrounding countryside, villages, buy themselves something to eat. And he answers, you give them something to eat. I mean, they're being good managers. They're thinking about what, it's late in the day. They're probably hungry. We need to send them to get some food. There's a lot of people here. I mean, there probably weren't enough Taco Bells even open for them to be able to go and get food and maybe the bartering, maybe maybe there would be enough Who knows? They're thinking about the people, and Jesus, in the midst of this, has a grand plan of what he will do. He challenges them. You give them something to eat. So oftentimes in our faith, what we will do is we'll say, we'll put it on somebody else, and there's a need, and we start thinking we'll get somebody to meet the need, and God just kind of comes and taps on our shoulder and says, you do it. And he challenges us to take the step of faith, digging into our own resources to meet the need. And that's exactly what he did with them. He said, you give them something to eat. And notice how much was required. Mark chapter 6, down at verse 37. I mean, it wasn't like, hey, we're throwing in a couple bucks here. This is like 8 months of a man's wages. I mean, 8 months, that is close to a full year. That is 3/4 of a year of wages. You go ahead and feed them. And how are we going to do this? Are we going to spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? I mean, they're counting their pennies, and that's exactly what we do sometimes. We start counting our pennies and start saying, well, we can't do this, and we can't. This is a good one for me. I did something yesterday trying to help out a cause, and it was south of 1K, and it's like, okay, there's a lot going on, and we're retrofitting a house, remodeling our house that we bought, and a lot going on. But it's just the Lord said, no, you do this. Okay, Lord. So we trust in him, and we learn to take those steps of trust in the Lord, especially when he taps us on the shoulder and just says, you do that. And we oftentimes want to come back and go, but Lord, you don't know. Wait, can we say that to the Lord? Lord, you don't. Of course he knows what the situation is. Of course he knows what the need is. Of course he knows all these things. And he just says, will you trust me? And so that's the step that they had to take. And they thought, okay, we're going to feed a couple people here. And again, as Ken has said, God's math doesn't always add up, but God comes through again and again and again. And right now, in some ministry circumstances, some ministry situations, to see God do that. Some of the local ministries around where I am and where many of you live, we need to see God step up, and God can and God will step up in an amazing fashion. He asks us to trust him. Yes, he also asks us to be wise stewards. That is also true. And but there are times it's like there's just nothing you can do but trust. You don't have enough bread. You don't have enough fish. And yet God is wanting to do something. God is wanting to feed the people. God is wanting to build that building. God is wanting to make that ministry flourish because of its gospel impact. And sometimes we're just in the place where it's kind of funny to say the only thing we can do is trust God. Well, that should be the starting point, the middle point, and the end point, that we trust God all the time in all of these circumstances. So he says to the people, in fact, before I go over there, let me just read this testimonial here in the comments. Many years ago, it was late at night, and my gas tank was reading close to empty. I pulled into a store parking lot and just sat there praying to God to guide me to what to do. No cell phone at the time. She said, yep, I'm that old. The next thing I know, my gas tank is reading closer to half full. Yep, we serve an awesome God. And it's like, I mean, God can do things like that. And we can say there's all kinds of reasons why did this happen? And, does God work in these ways? Well, God works in some pretty phenomenal ways. And here is one testimonial of just watching God be at work. And we have our daily lives where we watch God at work, and there are missionaries that you can hear their stories. Dr. Ken and his organization, phenomenal Christian University. He probably would have stories. They just cut the ribbon, I think, for some new dormitories, if I remember what that was. And to talk about how God provided for that. Testimonials. God, we serve an absolutely incredible God who does absolutely incredible things. So back into the text, noticing what takes place in the text, it says they wanted to send the people out. He says, you give them something to eat. They said that would take 8 months' wages. We talked about the costs, and sometimes God asks us to do costly things. And they ask, are we to spend that much on bread to give it to them to eat? I'm thinking about bread. I'm thinking about carbohydrates this morning. I'm thinking about bread with butter. I'm thinking about homemade bread with toasted, hot out of the toaster with butter on it. That's what I'm thinking about now. Thanks, Jesus, for making me think about that. Anyways, verse 37. He answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go spend that much and give it to them to eat? Verse 38, how many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. So when they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Jesus directed them to have the people sit down in groups on the green grass. And we've already talked about verses 39 and 40. That's kind of probably how they had count. I mean, it's like, how do you know they had that many people? I mean, you ever been at an event? I mean, we had that at our trunk or treat event on Monday night, that outreach event. And how do you have a count of how many people? Well, one person had a particular number of items they were giving out, and about 45 minutes before the event was over, they ran out at 500, and people were still coming in droves. So, we can give a conservative number, or we can give a larger number of how many people we had in attendance, kind of a ballpark guess. Same type of thing here. I mean, they had them set down in groups of hundreds and fifties, and that's perhaps how they got the count. But then the most amazing thing happens down here in verse 41, and we read what happens. They, taking the loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. Some of the versions will say 2 small fish, like sardines or something. So notice the thanks. Notice in verse 41, the upward gaze. Literally, the upward gaze, because it says, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Friends, I want to talk about a couple different angles on this. One angle is the angle of learning to trust God. Just trust God to offer him what you've got. Some of us will say, I don't have much to offer to the Lord. The Lord can take a very little and make it into very, very much. And you think, well, my contribution won't count. Oh, yes, it will. Absolutely, it will. And so don't hold back when God's tapping you, and maybe it's in terms of giving. You think of the widow, and we talked about this a little bit, I think on Sunday, the widow who gave her few small mites, the little bit that she had, and the little she had was really all she had, and she sacrificed that, and she was commended by Jesus in giving the little she had that was so very much to her for the Lord's service. And we talked on Sunday. I gave you a quick 4, and this is not something that I got from the Timothy group, but it's something that some of it came from them, but I filled it out a little bit more, kind of We there are tips that we give when giving to the Lord. You throw a couple bucks in the bag, maybe. I say the bag because we use bags here. So there's tips that we give sometimes to God's work of a couple bucks here and there. There are gifts and offerings that we give that might be a little bit more substantial. But then there is also the level of the tithe that we've talked about before. That's where you're giving a full 10%. And then there are sacrifices that go beyond, kind of 4 levels. Again, if you're still listening, I don't know if you've used that as a kind of a 4-fold development there. Tips, gifts, tithes, and sacrifices. That woman made a sacrifice to the Lord. This little boy, and this passage doesn't say it was a little boy. The other passage does say it was a little boy who gave his lunch, if you will. You just give what you've got to the Lord. A little bit. The Lord says, "Can I use that?" Look at how much came back. I mean, there were 12 basketfuls of bread and fish. They ended with more than they started with. And not only did they end with more than they started with, it was like, well, did people start contributing more? What happened here? Well, when you look at what it says, again, in verse 41, I mean, the upward gaze, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks to God. He's demonstrating his faith in the Father. Then he gave them, the fish and the loaves, to the disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all, and they all ate. And notice what it says. They were satisfied. They were satisfied. It wasn't like, okay, they had a little taste. It's like you want just a little nibble, a little snack, a little, just enough to just tease you. No, it says they were satisfied. It's like they had a whole sandwich, the whole thing. They had a whole, they were satisfied. All the people were satisfied. God isn't asking us to just give a little taste of what he's got to offer to the world. We give the little bit we got, and God will multiply it. Now, that can be financial giving. That might be you giving the words of the gospel. That might be you doing an act of compassion and helping somebody out, just to trust God and ask God to use it. And it's just amazing how God can take it and multiply it. They all ate and were satisfied. The disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces. Now, these baskets weren't like little bread baskets like you might have on the dinner table. These are more like laundry baskets, that size. I mean, they had that much left over at the end of the meal. And again, considering how many people were fed. All this, just the question, what can God do through you? What can God do for you? Can God make it so that you eat and are satisfied in what he has to provide? Absolutely. Might you be that person that has those little bit of bread and a little bit of fish, and you'd offer it to Jesus to use and he would multiply it? Will we trust him? Will we trust him to provide for us? Will we trust him? Will we offer him what we've got to offer him and trust that he's going to multiply it all over the place? As some of you know, and I'm not going to be bashful at talking about this, I'm trying to figure out the travel plans for the spring and winter months, and so many opportunities. Already going to, I didn't even mention this the other day, going to Florida with the Ethnos 360 that used to be New Tribes Mission, going down to their headquarters down in Florida in February. Then the invite to go to South Sudan, that might take place in January, and then the opportunity to go with Concentric Global to meet with disciple-making leaders from 125 countries in March, and then to Israel, really thinking that God is telling me I'm supposed to do all those things, and the need of trusting God because of the multiplication there. And that might be something you say, hey, Pastor Jim, I'll help you get to all those places, because we're seeing the multiplication of ministry in places like South Sudan and Uganda. We're seeing the multiplication in partnership with groups like Concentric and the disciple-making leaders from 125 countries that you'll meet with. We see the multiplication, whatever that is. I just invite you. You might, as a result of having been here this morning, of course, I always talk about New England Bible College and Seminary because we're in Maine, but you might look up Grace Christian University and decide, you know what, I'm going to give a gift there as well. We can give, but we can never outgive God. That is something that also that comes out. There's so much in this passage. We can't outgive him. They gave him a little, and he multiplied it into a great deal, not only satisfying the multitudes, but having a bunch left over. Oh, that we'd be people of faith that just trust in him. Oh, that we'd be people of faith that just bring him what we have to offer him and trust him to use it. Oh, that would be people of faith that when we are in the place of need, that we'd be trusting God to meet our needs as well. Well, I hope that your faith has been stimulated to trust God at your point of need today, whatever that point of need might be. Perhaps your faith has been stimulated to offer a gift, whether it's to Veracity Chapel or to Fairhaven Camps or New England Bible College and Seminary or Grace Christian University. They're not our sponsor. This is not a paid advertisement this morning, but a good friend, a good brother there. But just to say, Lord, I'm going to offer you what I've got. Would you please use it? It might be an act of compassion, helping somebody in need. Lord, help us to have hands that are open. Help us to have eyes that are turned upward. Help us to have hearts that trust that you might take what we have and multiply it for the kingdom. Lord, in our lives, be glorified through our trust, through our gifts, through our faith. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, friends, that's a wrap for today. I will see you tomorrow. Have a fantastic day, everyone.